mean, even though he had a large circle of male friends, Clementine, I think, was his safest space to
Yes, it's
to express his views as well.
such a good point. In fact, there is a story that he had said when he was looking for a wife, he was desperately looking for a wife. And he said that he wanted a woman whose beauty would launch 1,000 ships. Well, the problem was finding that together with the intellect. And he had many women who rejected him first. As you say, he wasn't exactly like the most sought after person. But yet, when he sees Clementine, he realizes he's got the beauty and he's also got the intellect. And so that really works well. The other thing is the two of them were drawn in terms of their common interests that we just mentioned. One of the things is she really loved the fact that he was one of the rare politicians at that time that supported women's right to vote. And it was not a popular stance to take at that time. And so she's really drawn to his liberal views. And that's something that they do have in common. She had been influenced years before in her boarding school by teachers about feminism. And so we're going to see where later, of course, that becomes a passion of hers in terms of women's rights. So all of that went towards this binding together of the two of them. I think what's also very interesting is that she loved right away his enthusiasm, his idealism about politics and history and culture. And when she was with him, she felt drawn into the thick of things. And she loved the feeling of being maybe part of an essential cog in the core of England. So she feels that right away when she's with him. So this would be the reasons why these two people were drawn to each other. So here she is. She comes from this very sad kind of background, and now she develops into this woman. And let's talk about some of the traits that you saw in her as a mature woman. So what did you see in her? How would you describe her? What are some of the traits that you would use to describe her?
One of the things that really jumped out at me, Lynda, as I was reading this book, was this woman had an ego. She had an ego that never stopped, and it enabled her to accomplish so much. I mean, throughout this book, towards the end, I thought, Clementine really likes to toot her own horn. And that's fine. She had a lot to toot about. But I was struck by how strong an ego she had. And she needed that to keep up with this man and to deal with him and not be overpowered by him.
Lynda, there's a number of comments. There's a number of comments, and they're all similar on the comments about inner strength and strong and supportive. And one was it self-esteem or ego? Like it's very strong for sure to echo Kathy. And Leslie had your hand up.
I thought Winston was so overpowering. Yes, she was intellectual and they discussed things and whatever, but she had, look at the times we're talking about. She had to tone herself down. She had to cater to him. I don't know whether she would have been a motherly mother or not, but certainly Winston, I had some problems. He was encompassing. She had what you would call a nervous breakdown, maybe. I don't know. Somebody else might want to talk about that. He was pugnacious.
He was strong. We're going to talk a little bit about him later because he is a very interesting character. Right, exactly. Getting back to your point, though, anybody, I agree with you, Judy. I felt she had this amazing strength. She did. But she also had a lot of fragility to her. And you know that in terms of it was so overwhelming for her. The demands that he made, as you say, Judy, his demands were so difficult. And she was overwhelmed by running her house. And there's one part where it talks about all the things she had to take. She was trying to take care of babies. That wasn't her natural instinct. She was trying to fend off her mother-in-law, Jenny. Remember how Jenny kept intruding on their lives, and so she's trying to fend her off. And ultimately, she's got a lot going on, and she ends up she does have a nervous breakdown. And throughout the story, we see where she becomes overwhelmed, and she has to have these restorative vacations by herself, without her family, and certainly without Winston. So we see this fragility in her also. Just how difficult it must have been for her to meet his high expectations, put up with some of his mood swings, right? His explosive temper and all. What's interesting too about her is there was a certain insecurity, and I think maybe that's where that boasting about herself that Kathy was talking about. I think it says here that she never felt the risks of conflict. That was never overwhelming. None of those things that Winston demanded of her. When it came to, smoothing things over, that kind of stuff, she never found that overwhelming. What her greatest fear was marginalization. She didn't want to be cast aside. And so she had that insecurity of, she wanted to be part of the scene.
Yeah.
She wanted that substantive role.
Lynda, did you see that Leslie had her hand up? Leslie?
Oh, no. Leslie? Yeah, go.
Okay. First of all, she was definitely her own person, and she was an individual who did what she wanted to do despite what was acceptable. I mean, when she attended those meetings and she was the only woman, I thought, wow, that was amazing. And I also liked the way she stood up for herself against Violet. And Violet was really sneaky, wasn't she? Sticking her bare foot underneath Winston's.
Playing footsies there at the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to go because there's a lot of wind out there and I hear crashing noises on my porch, but I'll be back.
Okay, good.
Also, Lynda Farber has her hand up, and so does BC.
This may be a really unpopular point of view, but I did not like her. I fought with myself. Whatever she did was fine, but I found her a very selfish, self-centered, egotistical person, and I couldn't get past it. The fact that she could rationalize, she could leave her children and then say, oh, I'm a bad mother. It did not gel with me. And as much as I tried, I went back and did research on her. At one point in the book, I had to laugh. She said, you know me, I don't care about being acknowledged for things. And I went, oh my God. I just couldn't help it. I mean, everything she did was wonderful, but not at the expense of, I think, the things that I feel are important, and maybe she did not.
I agree with Lynda. This is Stephanie. I had a really hard time with her, and I had to ask myself, it's because it's not being written in her, it's written in her voice, but not by her. It was written by another person. But I did not like her, didn't like her throughout the book. And it really also, you start to feel really guilty because here is a strong woman, as you say. She played an extremely powerful role and an influential role at the time. But personally, I also, and I don't know if that's because of the way the author wrote it.
I just need to interrupt for 1 second. First of all, we're having like a torrential rainstorm here, and I'm sure that you guys are too. So this is being recorded, and hopefully if we lose power or anything, I don't know what's going to happen with this, but just know if you lose power, we may still have power and we will have a recording. So just send me an email afterwards. So I just wanted people to be aware, just stay safe, because I don't know what's coming through this storm. But I do want to point out that BC and Jackie both have their hands.
Okay. BC, were you up, and then Jackie? Yeah.
So I find both of them are heroes of mine, and I need to clarify, I'm a member of the Churchill Society, so they're very much heroes of mine. I think there are two people on I think they're two similar people that rather than not getting along, managed to serve each other's needs. But they were so similar in both having great strength and great weaknesses. Um, I think neither one of them could have survived without the other. Winston wouldn't have been as successful without her. She would not have had the meaning in her life without him. And with regard to the children, um, I have an issue on the, I have, this is not a personal criticism. I have an issue with the comment, not the person. But the issue of judging a woman by what kind of mother she is because she didn't necessarily feel maternal and was happy for the nannies to take care of the kids, to me,
Typical.
was absolutely not uncomfortable. And the two of them really served this immense, once in a lifetime great purpose of literally saving the world, and they stepped up to it with great challenge. And the fact that she had a breakdown and Winston used to drink at 11 o'clock in the morning doesn't bother me because they managed to get done what they had to do. They had a purpose.
Interesting, right.
Jackie and Jillian both have their hands up as well. So Jackie, what's next?
I agreed with Stephanie. I had a really hard time. I enjoyed the book, and yet I didn't like her through the entire thing. I started off liking her, and then more and more and more, whatever you want to call it, assertiveness, ego, full of herself, it didn't matter. But I have to say that the very last comment that I wrote in my notes was I thought this was written very much with a 2020 slant, a perspective on a 20th century woman. And I think we have a hard time in our society. We always want to judge what was by what is now. And I think that's what the author did. I agree with Stephanie. I think she wrote it in Clementine's voice, and yet it really wasn't Clementine's voice. And she wrote it in the here and now, not then.
So that's a very good point. And I just want to say to you that the author talks about the idea that she also had trouble with her as a mother. I want to go on and talk about her as a mother. But she says, you know, we have to be careful because we think of motherhood very different today than they did then. It was very hands off. In that social class, they really didn't handle their children. Their nannies did. Their nannies did all of it. And so it's difficult to try to, you know, make a comparison even today. It does sound like, you know, there was a lot of focus on other things, certainly. I think that, BC, you were the one that was saying about they served a greater purpose. And I think when we look back on it, that's true. But, you know, their children probably did pay the price for that. I do want to talk a little bit about, oh, wait, I'm sorry, Jillian, you had your hand up.
Sorry, yes, thank you. About the whole motherhood thing and the daughter that died with the fever and her going away and the nervous breakdowns. I wanted to find out now what research, because you said she had letters that the daughter, so how do we have all this information? Like, I mean, it starts off how she ran away, like out of the house the day she was getting married. Like, now, where are those details from? Like those things.
So Jillian, that's a really good point because I don't really have an answer for that. She does not say where the fact and where the fiction separate, but she does let us know that unfortunately the information about her, and she uses the language, it wasn't as robust as she would have liked. So she does put a lot of fiction in there. So it's very true what Stephanie is saying. And yeah, I mean, and Jackie, I think that there's no question that a lot of this is in the author's voice because I don't, in terms of fiction, because I don't think that she had as much information as she would have liked. On the other hand, obviously, a lot of these stories are coming from the letters, you know, that she's put them together. But which ones, I don't know, Jillian, but that is interesting. Yeah.
But Lynda, there are a number of people that did in the chat, right? They agreed with Lynda Farber having a hard time with her, which is an interesting idea since we're not sure how much the author took liberty and that type of thing as well,
Right.
you know, with the information that she had. But I just wanted to point that out because there were a number of people that wrote that.
That agreed. Yeah. Yeah. Well, she was definitely a strong woman, that we definitely come out with. When it comes to motherhood, she says, I mean, it was just not a job that she came easily to. And listen to this line. I finally understood, she's in her voice, Clementine, I finally understood mother's need to keep her children at bay, even to maintain a separate house for us and our governess nearby, but distinctly apart. I began to wonder why no one had told me that the maternal state didn't come naturally to all women. So I think that's all very telling. Obviously, what we see is that, I mean, she's very honest. When Diana, her oldest, was born, she says, I love my daughter, but taking care of an infant leaves me empty. So she's telling it like it probably was. And obviously, that feeling must have come through to the author from the letters that she examined. And of course, what does definitely come through is the grief and the guilt that she felt after Marigold's death from septicemia in 1918. She herself says, I realized how little I'd reflected on the children during the 2 months away, except when I wrote their daily letters. And she wonders, what's wrong with me? Shouldn't a mother be preoccupied with her children when she's apart from them? So she's berating herself. And I'm sure that actually came through in the letters, that she was berating herself, perhaps about her mothering. The other thing, anything else you want to add about that? I thought it was interesting that the one that she remained the closest to was Mary, who, by the way, is the one who assembled the letters. So she is close with Mary. And why does she think Mary turned out so great? Because she wasn't the one who really raised her. She turned her over to the nanny, to this first cousin, right?
Yeah.
So she's very close with her.
Lynda, Leslie has her hand up and so does Nellie. So I don't know if they want to make a point about this.
Go right ahead.
Okay, I just want to say that when you look at the way, you know, Prince Charles was raised, I mean, there have been comments about lack of maternal stuff going on there. And I think that's what Harry and Meghan are trying to avoid. And so, you know, it's sort of natural that the British have done that in the past. So I wasn't surprised to see that. Plus, there are some women that just are not meant to be mothers. And I was wondering why she had so many children, you know, if she knew that she had those feelings.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And Nellie, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Nellie.
I can't help but comparing.
Nellie, can you talk into your microphone a little bit because we can't hear you?
Oh, okay. Okay, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, it's soft, but go ahead.
All right. I can't help but comparing her to another very strong woman, very loved by me all my life. It's Golda Meir, that I have known personally because I was a secretary of the ambassador, the French ambassador in Israel, and I met her several times. She had such a good sense of humor, such a strong woman. But when you read her book, you see how guilty she feels about not being a good mother. And that, of course, you cannot be all of that in life. You have to choose, and she did so well in Israel, so good for the country, that I don't blame her for not being a good mother. I always thought I was a very good mother, but that's not what the children think. So anyway, that's my point of view.
Nellie, thank you for sharing that. It's a wonderful, wonderful comparison. Thank you for sharing that. Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
You sort of she sacrificed that perhaps for the good of a larger, greater good, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lynda, Lynda Farber also has her hand up. Lynda?
Yeah, thanks. I have to say that my comment wasn't solely based on her lack of interest in being a mother. I know many people that, you know, don't have it, don't care that, you know, but my feeling about her was her inner thoughts that led us to believe, and I guess Stephanie's point is really important here, that it was the author's point of view and not hers, since we don't know the research, that she was selfish, not only because of her parents. She was insensitive, she was conniving. And throughout, that kind of personality was so pervasive that I didn't like her. Not because she wasn't a good mother. That was, that's part of it, that she wasn't sensitive to some of the needs of her children and the great, in the great picture. But I've read a lot of her books, and I've enjoyed them immensely and never really felt this way.
Marie Benedict's books. Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Barb Rothstein also has her hand up. Barb.
Yeah, I with just to compare with Golda Meir, I think Golda Meir is wonderful, but I actually met her, but Golda Meir's husband took up the slack and knew and supported her in her ability to take care of Israel and took care of the kids, and the kids, I think, pretty well understood that too. I just think that I can see that a lot of the women would not want to be friends with Clementine. That's okay. You may not want her as a friend, but I think she did some amazing things. And I think you have to remember one thing, and that's that she and Winston are not judged by the same ruler. I mean, people are not talking about what a father he was as much as what a mother she was. So I think having been a professional woman and running a school and being a dean and so forth, I can get some of this.
Right on.
Thank you. Really insightful. Right.
And also
this is a woman, and we're judging a woman. Where is our judgment of Winston? What kind of, what kind of father was he?
Well, we actually got a little bit of insight into that. Right.
This book wasn't written in his voice.
I agree totally.
But this book was about with Clementine's voice. Maybe it's a whole different book to read about Winston. This is not, and I have to go back to what Lynda said. It is not about the mothering per se. It is an overall personality. And it's okay not to like somebody, even if they're a woman. I mean, I don't know that I would have liked Winston. Parading around, he did great things, but he paraded around in pink silk underwear, and he spoke to his secretaries from his bathroom. I don't know personally whether I would have liked to have a cup of tea with him. It's about this book and the way she wrote it.
Yeah.
But I do have to say, I just want to read one comment that Jackie wrote, which I think really does sum it up. And I also have to say, I'm loving that this is like creating this issue. This is very exciting for this book discussion. Is that Jackie said in her comment on the chat that she was sad for the son, but the part that really resonates with what everybody is saying is that he didn't understand her role in history, which I think is probably both the father and the mother, and children of great people must have it so very hard. So she is in a really, we can't relate to what she was dealing with, obviously. Right. And we are again hearing it through that author's point of view of what she's taking from what she's reading. But I think that Jackie was a fabulous comment because it resonates with what we're saying.
Right, thank you. Yeah. The one thing that is true that who had a comment?
Yes.
BC, go ahead.
First, I love the lively conversation and the difference of opinions and the respectfulness. I would have loved to be friends with both of them. I found them brilliant, difficult, challenging, and I would have welcomed the intellectual stimulation and challenge and brilliance of both of them. And at the same time, people like that aren't always easy. So there's a little bit of give and take, and a little bit of give and take that goes along with people that are. Well, Winston, I know for certain, was just an absolute genius because I've read every book that he's ever written. Um, but both of them I would have loved to have been friends with. With regard to Randolph, Randolph is the almost a stereotype or a caricature of more of a wealthy family or a prominent family's son who's a total screw up. Because Randolph was a screw up from when he was a child. And the biggest mistake that was finally acknowledged was that they just indulged him too much. And he had to, we could talk about contemporary people that used to be in the White House as children. Every mistake was covered up by money or influence. So Randolph was, a lot of families have a screw up, whether they're
right. But I think
or not.
there's right. But I think that there's no question that certainly greatness is what we would say about Winston in the end in terms of what he accomplished. Unfortunately, very often those children do pay the price. I think we can leave it at that. I think that part is true. But she was an interesting woman, even so, as we talked about, set apart from other women at that time. I love this part. At that time, most politicians' wives seemed to, in the words that the author uses, is they cultivated invisibility. And here she was, she longed for more of a substantial role. So, and that's what really Winston wanted from her, was more of a substantial role. I love this, that they said that political wives at the time are rarely seen and even more rarely heard. So you could see how she really stood out and really was set apart from those other women. And she did accomplish a great deal. Yeah, Jillian, did you have something you wanted to add? Yeah, go.
Yes, it's actually, she gets very upset with her husband because when Eleanor Roosevelt says that, her husband had told her whatever, that she really had no role and she was just the wife, she was very upset. Clementine, whatever, was very
Yes.
upset by that. So I just wanted to say, she wasn't the typical, and he wanted to make her typical, which was wrong. And she was very upset with her husband.
That's right. She was devastated by that. You're right. At the end, she really was, because it bothered her in that. I went back and I read that section, and what really bothered her is, number one, the public dismissal of what she had accomplished, but also the fact that he privately, what did he think about everything that she did? He just evaluated everything that she accomplished according to what was good for him. And so she was very devastated by his personal opinion and, of course, what he publicly stated. Yeah. Ironically, Winston calls her his secret weapon. And she does, according to this author, she plays a very big role in his political life. Do you remember any of the specific scenes in which she plays a role and we see her expertise in terms of the political piece? There were several scenes that really see. First of all, she did do a lot in terms of the social reform. She played a very big part in the women's movement. No question about that. That came from the research. But the other part was also in all kinds of social reforms. She really encouraged Winston and gained his support for a lot of the things she was thinking about and concerned about. Any other scenes that kind of, I thought that they were very interesting, certain examples that we see. Well, I love the part about de Gaulle. Do you remember that de Gaulle was part of Free France? Here he is. The guy is no longer in charge of France. He is now living in England, and the Vichy government, the pro-Nazi government, is in France. And of course, he comes and he's sitting in Winston's home. And here Winston had been his big defender to the Americans and everybody else. And he actually insults Winston. he makes a comment that Winston was wrong to have destroyed the French fleet, when actually he really didn't have a choice because the Nazis would have taken over all those ships. So he goes ahead, Winston knew they would be used against England. So she goes ahead and says to de Gaulle, that's really wrong of you to say, how rude of you to say that to us when my husband has been your big defender. And she's shocked that Winston hasn't answered him back. And of course, Winston says, oh, she doesn't really mean it. I apologize on her behalf. And she says, no, I do. I stand by what I said. And of course, what happens the next day? Do you remember? De Gaulle sends this big bouquet of flowers and with his apologies that he really was out of line. So you see where she really does, she sometimes acts as his voice, as Winston's voice. Anything else that strikes you? Eleanor? Eleanor,
yeah. Oh, I'm on me. Okay. I thought it was interesting, her feelings about Roosevelt, that she could not, right away, she picked up something that she didn't like about him. Whether he was a philanderer and she knew that and she looked down on that, but she absolutely did not trust him, nor how he would treat her husband in all of the negotiations. And I thought that was a very interesting part of the story with her.
I did too. Yeah, I did too. Absolutely. She wasn't taken in by his charm, and she really wasn't. And also, going along with that, Winston had given her the job of, when all of these emissaries, Roosevelt sent all these emissaries over, that Harry Hopkins and Averell Harriman sent over all these people that supposedly what Winston wanted, he said, help me woo these people so that they go back to Roosevelt and encourage Roosevelt to engage in the war. And of course, she was successful with these people, as he was. They went back and tried to encourage Roosevelt, but of course, Roosevelt didn't listen at that time. Not until Pearl Harbor did we get involved in the war. But again, he was relying on her to be involved in these conversations over the dinner table. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Lori Suskind, I think. Lori, did you have a comment? Just unmute yourself.
I was fortunate enough to read, I don't know if anyone else did, Splendid and the Vile, which was Eric Larson's book. And there was so much that Winston Churchill had to do to encourage the US to get involved in the war. And she, as you already mentioned, Lynda, was really behind the scenes, making sure that she knew exactly what to serve and how to do it and how to meet them and how to be in their favor. And I think they all went back and reported well to FDR. So I think she played a huge role in that regard and really took it seriously. So I just wanted to add that, but you had already alluded to that.
Lori, what's interesting about that is, because the negative way of saying, somebody's manipulative, so that sounds like a negative. She was manipulative. She knew what they liked to eat, and she went ahead and she made sure there were beautiful country houses for them to stay in, and she made sure there were the finest foods, and she also took them to the bombed out areas in London, and she knew how to play it, and she was quite successful at that. BC? Did you have something?
Splendid in the Vile, and would recommend. It was a great book. There's a question that I have, which I sometimes wonder if we don't know it, but that Winston and Clemmy sort of, not colluded, but worked together to say, okay, you do this and I'll do that. Because at times she took advantage of both her femininity, her role as a wife, and was able to take liberties to say things. And Winston could say, oh, hush up, and create a position that I wonder if behind the scenes they were working this out or it was just intuitive.
Interesting. Hard to know. Again, we don't really know. That's part of where fiction would have to come in, because we don't really know how the exchanges went. But certainly they did enact exactly what you're describing. Yeah. I want to talk about the fact that their relationship really changed during of course, listen, they're married 57 years, so relationships change. But clearly their relationship changed at a certain point. And do you remember what perhaps created some of that change?
She becomes really infatuated with a gentleman. I can't remember.
With Terrence Phillips, exactly. So, why is this interesting? What is attracting her? First of all, he's very handsome, right? And if you remember in the story, she thinks they have this wonderful connection, and they're just great in-depth conversations. And at one point she leans towards him, kind of expecting him to kiss her. And he, if you recall, very gently resists and rebuffs her. And what does he say?
I'm not the marrying kind.
I'm not the marrying kind. And she finally figures out what he means.
She thought he knew because many people knew he was gay.
He was homosexual, exactly. So she's, of course, mortified at first. But what's really interesting is what beyond the sex, which never happened, we know, what is it that really attracted her to him? Him to her, I should say. Why? What did she see in him? Jillian? Yeah.
He was very cultured. He was very into art, and he was just very calming. She felt so at ease with him, whereas with Winston, she was always just so stressed. You know, and that bird, he gave her a bird, he gave her a gift or something to remember to be calm and peaceful or something, the dove or something.
She says herself, with him, when she's with him, I found the peace to hear my own voice. It isn't drowned out by the roaring demands of others. And he all of a sudden is encouraging her. And more than anything, he appreciates her. And she says, I feel like a new person under his gaze. He respects me for who I am, not for what I can do for him and not for what he wants me to be. So all of a sudden she's feeling this. All of a sudden she's really feeling this lack of appreciation that Winston is, the appreciation that he is not showing her. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, moving on.
I have one thought.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's lack of appreciation, and somebody wrote that he was abusive. He was known to have a violent temper. I'm not saying it's right, but with all of his secretaries, he acted out and they were loyal to him for many, many years. People kind of indulged him because of either his brilliance or his greatness, whichever word you use. But what I think shifted for her with this other situation is most of her life, the deal she and Winston had is she was needed by Winston. Now she's with somebody who didn't need her. So I'm not sure if he appreciated her or just didn't need her, and it was a different feeling.
Right. Interesting point. Thank you.
He was American, right? He was American, not the same class system as in England. I had a whole problem with a lot of things, and I don't think Winston. I think he would have a problem if he was in politics today, and there was video today, and he would have a problem with the, what do we call it when the women, now are
sexual harassment, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Really. And
so you brought up something about modern day, and I want to ask you something. If we look at this marriage through a contemporary lens, do you think, how would their marriage have been different, perhaps? Would it have been different if we look at it as today?
Well, I don't think his behavior would be tolerated as easily as it was in those times.
Right.
He was a consummate bully. And I just don't think that would or should be tolerated.
Yeah. So you think she might not have tolerated it as well as she did?
No, yes, I think she would have behaved differently.
Right.
He probably would have been brought up with a different sensibility as well. I mean, the whole world is just so different. I mean, you can go back and back and back because you can't. I mean, some of it's who he is, and some of it is it's nature versus nurture, and it's just a different world. Like men today, and not that these things don't go on, but you're right, because of social media and TV and and women having such a larger role and so many more opportunities, it's just a different role. I mean, she herself would have had a completely different path.
Such a good point. That's what I was thinking about, is she would have had such a very different path. I don't know if he would have been different, but she would have been very different. It made me think today, actually there was a line in one of the interviews or something or something that came out of her real research. I think Clementine actually wrote at one point that she wished that she had been born for trousers rather than petticoats. And in today's day and age, I feel like she could have been, like when you think about some of these marriages, how about Clinton? The fact that she was a powerhouse behind him and then ultimately went out and forged her own path. Michelle Obama, you see these very strong women that have very successful husbands. They've been behind them. They've also been beside them. And I think that's where we might have seen a difference. So I'm a little concerned about our timing, Debbie. I know we're running a little bit late. So I just want to tell you something, because, just to get back to the conversation that we had with our differing opinions of Clementine. At the very end of the book, we have this in Clementine's voice, and again, this is the author writing. She says, in summing up Clementine's life's work, the author at the very end has Clementine looking back. And here's the quote: all the strain and struggle that have comprised my life, my lonely and strange childhood, the wild swings of my unusual marriage, my struggle with motherhood, my compunction to constantly prod myself worthy, the tumult of the wars, even my pervasive sense of otherness, all of that seems to fade away now. In the vacuum of calm, I see with unexpected clarity that without my unique hardship and failings, particularly with my children, I could not have become the Clementine who forged this path through politics and history. And without me, my husband could not have become the Winston who helped deliver this peace to this broken world. So I think it kind of sums it up, doesn't it? That she herself at the end, in looking back, realizes, yes, there were a lot of failings, but in the end, perhaps it was for the greater good. Any other comments that anyone wants to make at the end here? Did we leave anything out? Okay, hope everybody really enjoyed it. And of course, I think I love the selection that we did this month because I think we learned something, and I think I certainly did enjoy the conversation that we have all engaged in. Thank you so much.
Just to remind everybody, so the next two programs are Tuesday, July 20th. It's The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and it'll be Tuesday, August 17, The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abu Dari. And both programs are on the DPJCC website. You could register right now. You can go to hopefully the Sterling Road Library to get your book, or go on to Broward Library and get your book through the ebooks. But also want to make sure that you all are aware this Thursday, we have author Kristen Harmel, who wrote the Book of Lost Names, which I know many of you have read. And she will be in conversation with author Allison Hammer. It is a daytime program. It is no charge. That is also on our JCC website, and I encourage you to sign up for that program. It's a partnership program with 6 other JCCs. We've been doing these all year long, once a month, the Florida JCCs. It's a wonderful program. And last but not least, just to tell you that Daniel Silva will be online in July. So he is July 12th. So that, of course, you have to pay for that program. But we do have a lot of other programs coming up. We are planning for next season. We are going to be meeting with the Friends of the Sterling Road Library to continue these programs with you. And we thank you, Lynda, as always, for a wonderful discussion. And thank you, everybody, for being a part of today's lively discussion about Lady Clementine.
Thank you so much for being, your participation has been fabulous. Thank you, thank you.
See you.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy reading.
See you next month.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.